James Green didn't know his father and was raised by his mother alone until the age of 5. His mother told him something vague about plane testing and some accident. But James didn't believe any of it, as he could always sense that his mother wasn't telling the truth. Living with only his mother wasn't all that bad, so James rarely felt sad about it. But when Edward became a part of their family, the boy immediately understood. Now he would have a new dad. Edward was a successful businessman who spared no time or resources for his family. With him, Penelope felt like she was living her best life. James had never seen his mother so happy. It seemed that the long-awaited happiness had finally become a part of their home and would stay there forever. Prompted by his mother, James started calling Edward his father, which the boy didn't mind and was actually rather happy about. After all, he now had a father in his life who would now always protect him and provide support. Edward Douglas truly lived up to even the boldest of expectations. Every weekend, he took James to watch the latest Hollywood movies and also took him fishing to let his stepson enjoy catching trout. In James's memory, Edward was the image of a real man and a loving father. However, due to his young age, the boy couldn't definitively tell whether this attitude came from the heart or whether Edward was skillfully playing a role. Whatever it was, James saw only the good in Edward until about the age of 7. At that point, his stepfather gradually started imposing his will on him. At first, this was done gently and subtly. "Why do you want to play soccer, Jamie? You could get injured. You should try tennis or swimming instead." When the stepson gave in, Edward continued his educational process, convincing him to quit saxophone lessons in favor of piano. "Son, only drifters and subways play the saxophone. Real musicians sit at the piano or the grand piano," the man said. James complied even then. He loved it when Edward called him son. It seemed to the boy that Edward always did the right thing and never made any mistakes. But then, when Penelope suddenly fell seriously ill, her 8-year-old son James had to spend an extended period of time alone with his stepfather. And that's when it turned out that Edward wasn't as nice and kind as he wanted to appear in his stepson's eyes. While Penelope was at the hospital, James spent days at home unable to see his mother. Maybe there was some reason behind Edward's determination not to let his stepson see his mother in a rather sad and hopeless state. "Dad, when is Mom coming back?" James would ask with tears in his eyes. Initially, Edward tried to say something positive to raise the boy's spirits. But then, worn out from the hospital and Penelope's treatment-related problems, he stopped doing so and began preparing James for the worst. The boy had heard the ominous words cancer before, but being young and naive, he couldn't comprehend how terrifying it could be. That fateful evening, Edward came home in a foul mood and immediately locked himself in his study. Passing by the door, James heard fragments of a phone conversation about Penelope Green having passed away 2 hours ago. The realization of the horrific truth overwhelmed the boy. He had never before experienced such fear for his future. All this time, James lived with the thought that his mom would recover and everything would go back to normal. But now, left alone with his stepfather, the future no longer seemed as bright and predictable to him. Moreover, having pressed his ear against the door, James heard Edward say some terrifying words like orphanage and custody. The boy didn't know the meaning of the second word, but the only association he had with the first one was homeless, unkempt children deprived of parental love and care. Unable to cope with the overwhelming fear and anxiety, James stepped away from the door and started crying. Smearing tears all over his face, the little boy kept whispering, No, I don't want to go to an orphanage." At that moment, a shadow loomed over him. "Stop it, Jamie. You'll stay with me. I'll get custody no matter what it takes." The boy raised his head and saw his stepfather standing in front of him. Edward's gaze was firm and direct, indicating his sincerity. He took James by the hand, led the boy to his room, and put him to bed. Then, Edward took care of organizing Penelope's funeral. Since the late woman was raised in an orphanage from an early age, she had no close relatives. James would never be able to forget all the mournful events that stirred up the most troubling feelings in his heart. To Edward's credit, it could be said that he kept his promise and got custody of his stepson. From that point on, a completely different life began for little James. Edward turned out to be a strict father who never allowed his son any liberties. Moreover, to get in his father's good graces, James had to get good grades and do everything Edward asked for. If the boy happened to get a bad grade at school, a moral punishment awaited him in the form of an unpleasant conversation with his stepfather. No, Edward never mistreated his stepson in the literal sense of the word. The foundation of the businessman's upbringing played a part in preventing his son from having any freedom and keeping him on a tight leash. In some sense, this worked in James's favor, toughening his character and helping him set his goals for years ahead. Since he had no biological children, Edward prepared James to take over his business when the time came. Years passed. James graduated from high school and got admitted into university, intending to obtain a degree in economics. The young man didn't have the right to make mistakes. He wanted to appear worthy in the eyes of his demanding stepfather. Edward was always stingy with praise, never expressing his admiration for his son, fearing to lose control over him. When James graduated from university, his stepfather gave him a rather expensive gift. "Here, take this. This car is now yours. I'll get myself a new one, but that doesn't mean that the old one should be sent to the junkyard," the businessman said, handing his stepson the keys to his Ford. A sweet smile immediately appeared on James's lips. This was perhaps the first gift his stepfather had given him in all the years of their life together. And it didn't matter that the car had been in use for a long time. What mattered most was the attention, which James valued above everything else. Now, with his stepfather's car, the budding businessman started to literally copy his stepfather in everything, from the way he talked to his manners and clothing preferences. "Look, you're growing yourself a double. At this rate, he'll take over your chair soon," Edward's companions liked to joke. But Edward just brushed them off. The businessman had just turned 48, and he wasn't anywhere near ready for retirement. Rumors had it that after Penelope's death, Edward occasionally had relationships with other women, but James never touched on this topic, considering it shameful and not worthy of his attention. And soon, he met a young woman named Monica, who instantly overshadowed all the things in his life. They met rather accidentally when Monica was walking down the street in the rain, and James happened to be driving by. Suddenly, his car wheel hit a pothole, splashing Monica with dirty water from head to toe. The woman's light coat instantly turned black, and tears welled up in her eyes. Having realized what he had done, James jumped out of the car and started apologizing to the stranger. To the young businessman's credit, he immediately tried to rectify the situation and offered to buy Monica a new coat. "No, I really like this coat. I'm not ready to exchange it for a new one," the woman replied, having calmed down a bit. "All right, then let me at least cover the cost of dry cleaning," James persisted. After a brief pause, Monica agreed and said, "All right, if you insist, you can pay for my dry cleaning." Not even 10 minutes later, they were already sitting in a cozy cafe, chatting about everything under the sun. At that moment, Monica's coat was already at the dry cleaners, but after their time together, she completely forgot all about it. She enjoyed their time together so much that she immediately felt an inexplicable connection with the young man. A month ago, Monica went through a painful breakup with an older man who initially swept her off her feet, but then left her just 6 months into their relationship. But James was clearly different. His eyes showed infatuation with the young woman, who seemed like the epitome of female beauty to him. After that memorable evening, James and Monica began dating. Initially, the young businessman didn't tell his stepfather about his girlfriend, fearing that he might not approve. But when a month after they met, Monica told James that she was pregnant, he understood that he couldn't put it off any longer. Edward met the news of his stepson's impending marriage with open disapproval. "It's too early for you to tie yourself down with all those diapers and onesies. Who is she anyway? Some waitress, probably?" "No, Dad, she's from an ordinary family, and she works as a manager," James said hesitantly, regretting having brought up the topic. Edward didn't like his stepson's response and vehemently advised him against rushing into marriage. Unfortunately, their conversation ended up in a fight, causing James to feel very disappointed in his stepfather. Nevertheless, the young businessman still got his way. Sadly, Edward didn't attend his stepson's wedding and didn't get to see Monica in person. The estrangement between James and Edward lasted for many months, causing them to almost stop seeing each other altogether. Time went by, filling James and Monica's lives with the joy of the impending childbirth. The only thing that troubled the young businessman was his wife's rapidly growing belly. Her due date was still over a month away, but it looked like she could give birth any day now. "At this rate, you'll give birth sooner than expected." James sounded concerned. His intuition didn't fail him. Little Billy was born during the 8th month of pregnancy, and by all standards, he was considered premature. However, the obstetricians delivering the baby thought differently and were confident that the actual due date was much sooner than the mother had indicated. At that time, James was so overwhelmed with emotion that he didn't pay any attention to it. Everything was going great until the day when the new father got a visit from his stepfather. Edward came with flowers and toys, but when he saw his stepson's wife in front of him, he literally dropped the gifts. James didn't know what exactly had happened, but his father turned around and left immediately. "What's happening?" James asked, but Monica just shrugged, indicating that she didn't know what was going on. Edward didn't clarify the situation either, adamantly refusing to talk about it. A year passed, filling James's soul with worries and doubts. The problem was that his little son Billy bore no resemblance to his father whatsoever. The child's sparse hair was black as coal, while James himself had a light mane of hair, the color of ripe wheat. Monica also had light hair, which inevitably led the young man to some sad suspicions. None of his attempts to uncover the truth led to any good and only worsened the situation. Having decided to get to the bottom of things once and for all, James turned to a forensic medical examination bureau to conduct a DNA test. Just as James expected, Monica was against it. However, it no longer mattered to him as the case went to court and his wife had to explain her motives to the judge. Edward also appeared in court, trying to dissuade James from taking such a step. But when Monica broke down in tears, the judge asked, "Ma'am, why are you refusing to get a DNA test? Do you have any specific reasons?" Monica shuddered and then composed herself, answering, "I do have a specific reason, Your Honor. The thing is that my son's biological father is present in the courtroom today. His name is Edward Douglas." "What? What did you say?" James couldn't contain himself. The courtroom gasped, and Edward rushed outside to catch a breath of fresh air. As it later turned out, when Monica met James, she was already pregnant. It was Edward who broke up with her a month before she met James. He had no idea she was carrying his child. Monica didn't deceive anyone intentionally. She simply didn't realize her mistake until it was too late. Afraid to come clean, she prayed to God for forgiveness every day. Now that James knew his wife's motives, he didn't judge her for the lie she felt was necessary to save their family. Monica loved her husband with all of her heart, and he could feel it. Having embraced his wife, James left the courtroom together with his little son and to the sound of approving applause. Ever since then, the young family lived happily and virtually never fought anymore. As for Edward, fate later caught up with him. He died in a car accident a month after the court hearing, making James the only heir of his assets and his company. Perhaps it was fate. One should never forget about fate.